I've often said that King of the Hill at its core is about Hank Hill learning to bridge the generational divide and connect with his son Bobby. This is easier said than done, as the two not only grew up in vastly different cultures, but tend to have vastly different interests as well. And because Hank struggles so much to find common ground with his son, it makes it all the funnier that one of the few times an easy bonding opportunity presented itself on a silver platter, he managed to overthink it so much that he committed multiple crimes and got himself marked for death by rabid football fans. So, with the King of the Hill revival's first season come and gone, and Bobby looking built more like a linebacker these days, let's take a look at the season 12 opener, Sweet Smells of Excess, and how Bobby's relationship with Hank's favorite sport, football, has evolved over the years. Sweet Smells of Excess opens on a visit to the Megalomart, where Hank is elated to see Bobby both watching and enjoying football on the display TVs. Hank's love of the game runs deep, given that he himself was once a star running back who took Arlen High to the state championship. Bobby, on the other hand, for all his charm and people skills, isn't exactly the most athletic kid in the world.
Can't hear you, Dad.
On any given day, Bobby's far more likely to tune into a reality show or a comedy special than a football game. So Hank naturally sees this as a window of opportunity to share his passion for the sport with his son, and this wouldn't be the first time. If you only watched Sweet Smells of Excess, you'd think that Bobby had never even seen a real football game before.
The ref just threw some kind of hanky thing, and Nebraska had to move back 4 or 5 lines.
This isn't really the case at all, though. In the season 3 episode Hank's Cowboy Movie, Hank and Bobby take a trip to Wichita Falls to watch the Dallas Cowboys training camp. There's a really sweet moment where they even take to the field to act out a game-winning Super Bowl pass, and when Bobby can't make the catch, Hank just kind of rolls with it.
Ooh, dang.
Hold on a minute, pass interference.
Later on in season 5's What Makes Bobby Run, Bobby becomes the mascot for Tom Landry Middle School, which is much more befitting of his skills as an aspiring entertainer. I also really like how Hank is just proud that Bobby is involved in the football program at all. He doesn't think any less of him for being the mascot instead of a player. Quite the contrary, actually.
Now don't let him tease you too much. Remember, you're the mascot, not the place kicker.
But back in season 3, Bobby actually does play football as part of a youth league team in the episode 3 Coaches into Bobby. However, you get the impression that this is Hank's doing. A lot of parents sign their kids up for sports whether they want to play or not, and I think it's safe to say that that's what's going on here. Bobby seems more than happy to cheer from the sidelines, but isn't really confident in his ability to do much on the field, nor is Hank for that matter.
Hank, he's putting your boy in.
I'm on it.
In fact, a mere 6 episodes later in Love Hurts and So Does Art, Bobby doesn't even know what a 3-point stance is by name. He just knows it as the thing from football. So yeah, he's almost certainly just going through the motions at practice and not necessarily retaining a whole lot of information.
Put yourself in a 3-point stance. From football, Bobby, before the snap.
Oh, yeah.
Bobby kind of takes an interest in season 9's Caretaken Care of Business, but again, it's mainly to make Hank happy.
Crush Rushford.
Thank you, Bobby.
I think you can make similar arguments for Hank's Cowboy Movie. Going to the training camp definitely feels like Hank's thing. More than anything, Bobby probably just sees it as a way to spend some quality time with his dad. I mean, do you really think it was Bobby's idea to bring clipboards with them to grade the players on their performances? It's also pretty telling that Bobby goes to training camp wearing a jersey that clearly belongs to Hank.
Irvin heads for the goal line. That's you, Bobby.
Oh, okay.
That in mind, it's not surprising that Bobby sort of tends to take a back seat in most of the other football-centric episodes in the earlier seasons. That, or he gets wrapped up in something else entirely. He's barely a factor in Bills Are Made to Be Broken or Peggy Makes the Big Leagues, and in A Beer Can Named Desire, he's far more invested in getting acquainted with Cajun culture than he is in Hank's big day at the Cowboys-Saints game. Even Hank's Cowboy Movie ends up being less about the football itself and more about Hank trying to get Bobby to be proud of his hometown. All of this is to say that while the season 12 premiere does arguably fudge the continuity a little bit, Bobby's naivete regarding football really isn't as much of a retcon as it may seem like at first glance.
Hey, better, school. Wait, no.
It's also probably why Hank is so happy to see his son finally taking an interest in football of his own accord. The problem is that Hank doesn't really have patience to let this play out organically. He's so desperate to make that connection and so worried that the slightest bump in the road will turn Bobby off of football forever that he still feels that overwhelming urge to take the reins. And this line of thinking results in some pretty terrible decision making on his part. Things start simple enough, with Hank and the guys just trying to make sure Bobby enjoys a Cowboys game on TV, but to really seal the deal, they decide he needs to go to a big game in person.
Remember the day you found out cakes could be made of ice cream? Well, today is going to be better.
Again, Bobby technically had been to a high-level football game at this point, since he did at least tag along to the Superdome in a beer can named Desire, but I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the Hills and company weren't allowed to stay very long after Hank assaulted former Cowboys quarterback Don Meredith.
Hey, you! Get back here!
Anyway, they settle on the Big 12 championship game in Houston between the Texas Longhorns and the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and Hank's first mistake is letting Dale be the one to get the tickets.
Texas versus Nebraska?
Hank has to turn to a scalper to get into the game, and I should point out that reselling tickets in public without a permit is apparently illegal in Houston, but not Texas at large, and buying them is the first of multiple laws Hank will break before the day is through.
Thanks for bringing me those tickets I forgot, old friend.
The gang ends up with awful nosebleed seats, and they take the opportunity to rant about the stadium's luxury boxes, because they don't really see the people in them as true fans of the game, just people with a lot of money.
They're ruining football, and possibly baseball too, but it's harder to tell.
Hank remarks how wasteful it is that one of the boxes is empty, and that real fans could be putting it to better use. Bobby takes this to heart and decides to commandeer the suite for himself. Weirdly enough, once the guys catch on, we actually get a bit of unintentional foreshadowing for the revival.
Does Bobby know an oil tycoon or a Saudi prince?
Hank tries to get Bobby out of the box at first, but quickly convinces himself it's okay for them to stay. One, because, I mean, let's face it, the view is much better, and two, because the Longhorns had been playing pretty terribly up to that point, and they suddenly had turned their act around. So Hank, ever the superstitious sports fan, decides this must mean they're doing something right. So now we can add trespassing to that criminal activity list. Dale, Bill, and Boomhauer naturally take advantage of the situation as well.
Hank! We were worried sick! And our seats were awful.
The guys find out that the luxury box they're in belongs to Jake Middleton, a former Nebraska quarterback who's regarded as one of the school's greatest players of all time. He's also not actually a real guy, in case you're wondering, though I guess there is a pro hockey player by that name. As the clock winds down, the Longhorns appear to have the game well in hand, especially after the action spills out to the sidelines and Nebraska's head coach is incapacitated as a result. But things take a turn when the hapless assistant coach calls Jake Middleton to ask for a play. The guys have Hank impersonate Middleton, suggesting he call the dumbest play he can think of to secure a Texas victory. Hank is reluctant at first, but eventually puts the fix in, as he doesn't want Bobby's first real game to end in defeat.
It's done.
So I've seen a few people say that Hank doing all these things is out of character for him, given just by how the book he usually is. And first, I'd say that Hank slightly bending his usual code of ethics in an attempt to connect with Bobby through something he's passionate about is par for the course with this show. That's kind of what the entire series is about, and I think that's a great episode premise. But even beyond that, I don't really agree with the assessment for a couple reasons. Yes, in general, Hank is a rather principled man who doesn't have a lot of patience for underhandedness. However, we also see at multiple points in the show that Hank becomes more willing to bend, if not outright break his own moral code, when football is involved of all things. The game is sort of a weakness for him in that way.
May God have mercy on me.
I'll give you an example. In Season 10's Harlot Town, Hank is horrified to see that his beloved tea kettle has been defaced with graffiti. And in Season 1's King of the Anthill, he threatens to cancel his newspaper subscription over an article spotlighting local graffiti artists. But in Three Coaches and a Bobby, he actively facilitates Bobby and his fellow football players tagging a bridge in the name of Team Pride.
And winners paint bridges.
Because this graffiti is tied to a football tradition that gives it a pass in Hank's eyes. I can't think of too many other situations where Hank would be okay with Bobby doing something like this, never mind encouraging him to do it. Eggs and toilet paper on Halloween are one thing, but this feels like a step up from that.
Just paint the dang bridge.
I mean, this is Hank Hill doing vandalism. Then in Peggy Makes the Big Leagues, Hank is complicit in helping Arlen High's star football player skirt Texas's no pass, no play law. He not only cheats the system, but completely undermines his wife in the process. He even gives an A to a sham essay that misspells the word propane. If that doesn't say Hank's been compromised, I don't know what does.
Strickland propene.
As far as sweet smells of excess is concerned, it doesn't help that Hank's friends aren't exactly known for being the best influences. He basically has Dale as the devil on his shoulder, and Bill is the easily swayed angel.
I'm not sure if helping Texas is ever wrong.
It isn't! God bless Texas!
By the way, in keeping with the football theme, I'm just gonna go ahead and name Dale the comedic MVP of this episode.
This is exciting! Hank, You should really come in here and see this.
But all the Texas fans watching the game pay the karmic price for Hank's sabotage when his play horribly backfires and hands Nebraska the win. Now effectively fugitives, Hank and the guys have to make a daring escape from the stadium, all while keeping Bobby in the dark about what's really going on. And they do this under the guise of made-up football traditions.
We do what is called a Longhorn stampede. We race out of the stadium to the car as fast as we can.
If I can criticize anything in this episode, it's just how naive Bobby is. Not regarding his football knowledge, just in general. I could see Hank getting away with this if Bobby was younger, and I get that Bobby trusts his dad, but for a 13-year-old kid, you'd think he'd have some follow-up questions about why they're leaving the stadium through the maintenance exit, or why a guy wearing the same jersey as Hank is getting mauled in the parking lot.
Little post-game roughhousing like puppies do. Yep. There's the biting.
But I also really like how Bobby's takeaway from the game is ultimately what shows Hank the error of his ways, because despite the fact that the Longhorns lost, Bobby still had a blast. Hank was trying so hard to make sure Bobby became a true football fan that he never stopped to consider that maybe he already had. It's a classic case of someone overthinking things so much that they can't see what's right in front of them.
All football games aren't like that.
They're not?
No, I promise they're not.
That's too bad.
Football is a big deal in Texas, and that's something that permeates King of the Hill's setting, even in episodes that aren't specifically about it. I already mentioned Tom Landry Middle School, which is obviously named for the two-time Super Bowl winning head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Throughout the series, we also sometimes see Hank turn to Landry for guidance, like in an almost religious way.
Dad's talking to the Tom Landry plate again.
There's also Staubach Elementary, which is named for former Cowboys quarterback Roger Staubach, who actually won those 2 Super Bowls for Landry. Hank is far from alone in his passion for football. It's something that runs deep in Arlen, and the show isn't shy about showing the ugly side of that obsession. In What Makes Bobby Run, after Bobby shirks a long-standing football tradition, he's ridiculed and ostracized by not only his peers, but his elders.
Nurse Jennings?
Pick 'em up.
And in Season 8's New Cowboy on the Block, a former NFL player who moves to Arlen continually gets a pass on his awful behavior just because of the Super Bowl ring on his finger. But while sports fandom undeniably has its toxic elements, the camaraderie it's capable of building is just as undeniable. You can definitely see why Hank views this as a way to get closer to his son. It's just that the culture of obsession has a way of obscuring his genuine desire to bond with Bobby.
We can redo your whole room in Longhorns if you want.
It all goes back to what I said in the beginning of this video, about Hank sort of being the one in charge of Bobby's early involvement with football. And Hank can push the issue all he wants, but the only way Bobby's love of the game is going to be real, the only way it's going to last, is if he's allowed to get there on his own. And despite everything that went wrong at the Texas-Nebraska game, he did. And this allowed Bobby and Hank to close that gap between them just a little bit more. Plus, they managed to avoid getting arrested, banned, and/or beaten, so, you know, that's good too.
We can go again, can't we?
We sure can.
It's also implied that Bobby's appreciation for football really sticks this time around. In Season 13's Bois My Nose, he's one of Hank's biggest supporters in the flag football rematch of the state championship game.
Looking good, Dad! You should wear flags more often!
That being said, Bobby is still his own person with his own priorities. He may have become a bona fide football fan in Sweet Smells of Excess, but the show makes it clear that he's never going to be as obsessed with the game as Hank is. We see this later in Season 12 in the episode The Courtship of Joseph's Father, when a prestigious private school tries to lure Joseph away from Tom Landry to play football for them instead. Hank and the other adults are distraught at the idea of their winning season going up in smoke. Bobby, meanwhile, is understandably far more concerned with potentially losing his best friend than he is with the school losing its star quarterback. He and Hank may have a more mutual love of football at this point, but they're still operating at very different frequencies.
Bobby, you can find a new best friend. A winning football season is once in a lifetime.
But that connection is very much there, and it's something we've already seen carry over to the King of the Hill revival on Hulu. In the Season 14 episode Any Given Hill Day, Hank and Bobby take part in the Dallas Cowboys fantasy camp at the Cowboys Stadium in Arlington. This obviously mirrors the two going to the Cowboys training camp back in Season 3, but we also see that evolution in their dynamic on display, as it's really Bobby who tries to take the lead in this one. There's still no indication that he's becoming a football fanatic on Hank's caliber, but even after all these years, he still sees it as something they can reliably enjoy together.
Next weekend, you and me, we're gonna toss the old pigskin.
This episode even kind of harkens back to Sweet Smells of Excess in some subtle ways. For starters, we see that old habits die hard when it comes to Hank trespassing around stadiums, only this time it really blows up in their face. Poor wording aside, there was also a recurring joke in the season 12 premiere about just how ridiculously expensive going to big sporting events was becoming, even back in 2007, and Any Given Hill Day acknowledges how it's gotten even more out of control in the 18 years since.
Cowboy tickets for my dad are $300 each.
It's not a huge plot point, of course, but it is the catalyst for Hank and Bobby going to the fantasy camp instead of an actual game, since Bobby's girlfriend Willow has an in for them. Speaking of Willow, this episode also follows the classic King of the Hill formula of Hank finding common ground with someone he's initially unwilling or unable to understand. Willow's lifestyle and appearance are pretty antithetical to Hank's sensibilities, but although he's very put off by her at first, they end up really getting along after Willow reveals her hidden talent for football, something she inherited from her own father.
My dad used to work here, so I kind of grew up around football.
This leads to some conflict since Bobby feels sidelined as a result, pun intended. He looks a lot more natural on the field at 21 than he did at 12, but he still has some trouble keeping up, which causes old insecurities to resurface.
Overhearing my dad telling my mom that I better get better at math if I'm gonna be so bad at sports.
But Willow's the one to point out that while football can certainly be conducive to bonding, it's not a replacement for it. And she knows this all too well given that her dad passed away sometime prior. It's a moment that really kind of helps put things in perspective, especially now that Hank's getting up there in age.
Talk to Hank while he can still talk back.
Still, it'll be interesting to see if the revival delves even further into Bobby's relationship with football as an adult, and what role it might continue to play in his relationship with Hank. I mean, the Cowboys may not have been to the Super Bowl since before King of the Hill's initial Fox premiere nearly 30 years ago, but it seems like Hank is sticking with them through thick and thin.
This is the Cowboys.
I mean, that's vintage Hank Hill. We do have the episode titles for season 15 already, and the finale's title is an obvious football pun, no cuddle offense, so we'll see if this is a football episode and see what it actually entails. In the meantime, Sweet Smells of Excess is not only an incredibly fun football episode, but a testament to King of the Hill's long-term storytelling. It's no secret that the show has some continuity problems. Any show that exists on a sliding timeline is gonna have that issue to some extent, but despite any perceived inconsistencies, it really feels like a natural progression and conclusion to Hank and Bobby's relationship with football in the context of the original series. For much of Bobby's childhood, it was Hank all but forcing him to take an interest in the sport, with very little long-term success. So when Bobby started liking football on his own, Hank just went full tilt, to his own detriment, of course, and in the end, he learned that sometimes giving his son a little bit more space in the short term can help foster a much stronger bond in the long term. It's actually a great microcosm of the show's central theme, these two learning to understand each other better. And hey, a little bit of cartoon violence never hurt either.
The fans will kill me, and they'll do it with tractors and farm machinery.
Folks, thanks for tuning in to this King of the Hill episode breakdown. This one was actually written by Noah Dominguez, who previously wrote our Daria videos, as well as the character study on South Park's Goth Kids. Please check out his info in the description, and stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.